Blessings, beloveds. Welcome back, Anastasia, Cosmic Astrologer, with you again today, sharing some further astrological insights for you guys. Okay, so what I want to just briefly touch on, so this is just going to be an introduction, just to give you some pointers in case you haven't considered these pointers that I'm about to give you. And I'll be drawing very heavily on Mark Jones's book, Healing the Soul, Pluto, Uranus, and the Lunar Nodes. So the subject today is so the moon's nodes, which is an axis in the birth chart relating to the moon, obviously. The moon's nodes are very much about what we've encountered in the past, what we've lived in the past, what we've experienced, developed, or struggled with, etc. That is the south node, and the north node shows us or indicates or points us to what it is we need to actualize this lifetime. Now, I have done videos on the nodes before, so for that reason I'm not going to unpack the meaning of the nodes necessarily right now, but what I want to point to is the importance of when a planet is squaring your nodes in your birth chart. So any planet squaring the nodes is highly significant, because in a nutshell, what it's showing you is unresolved matters from past lives that are current in this life, that need to be worked through, developed, actualized, released, transformed, healed, addressed, etc. So I myself have Saturn square the nodes, and that's certainly been very, very a very powerful point of painfully actualizing that Saturn energy in my own life, which has very much to do with my family. Now, what I want to do is just give you just a couple of keywords for each of the planets squaring the nodes. Now, naturally, when you are assessing a planet squaring the nodes, what you will bring into it as well is the location of where the nodes are, what houses they are in, and what house the planet is in that is actually squaring the nodes. So you need to pay attention to all these details, because they will give you the bigger picture meaning to this planet squaring your nodes. Okay, so anytime you see a planet squaring the nodes, pay attention to it. It's really, really important. It's very powerful, and it can be very, very difficult as well, because it is an unresolved energy that needs to be worked on this lifetime. We often, from the ego personality point of view, there can be a lot of resistance, a lot of unconscious residue resisting this particular pattern, because it's something that we didn't complete previously, and therefore we are challenged to face it this incarnation. So it's really, really important when a planet is squaring the nodes, and naturally each planet is going to symbolize very specific things, and we need to keep an open mind with that. So for example, the sun squaring the nodes, so what Mark says here is that the current life energy and purpose, which is the sun, is to resolve the issues symbolized by the square to the nodal axis through house and sign and through the node it resolves through. This placement indicates the current life as the critical one for the resolution of the unresolved material. This material is experienced in life as part of the core nature of the individuality and sense of personal meaning. This placement has echoes of the symbolism of the hero's journey, Joseph Campbell, the hero with 1,000 faces. So Joseph Campbell did a lot of work on what's called the hero's journey, and the sun is always representative of the hero's journey. The sun is the hero, the father, our own heroic solar force expression, energy and journey, actualization. So when the sun is square the nodes, there's something really primal, really important about the person actualizing their own hero's journey, essentially. It's really important. The things that I would add to that would be that because the sun represents the father, it can be indicative of the current life of the person, some very important connection with the father in this lifetime that perhaps comes from the past. So perhaps there was a relationship with the person's father in a previous lifetime, and there's some father-son energy issues that weren't resolved in the past. So therefore the person is born into a particular family with their father being their father this lifetime. And there's something really crucial about that relationship between the individual who's got the sun square the nodes and their father playing a pretty important role in the resolution of that, in the actualization of that, because the sun represents the father. So that's the sun. Now the moon obviously is mother. So if the moon is square the nodes, then there's something pertaining to the past that connects to the mother. So the person has some unresolved path with the mother, and therefore this lifetime there's going to be pretty important things to work through and to understand better and to actualize regarding the mother. So the relationship with the mother for the individual is really, really important. There's some very important connection between the person and their mother, which basically comes from past life experiences. So here it says the unresolved issues with the moon relate to family of origin, with the formation of the personality, and with the emotional body, because the moon connects to the emotional body. There may be specific unresolved material involved with the mother or primary caregiver, which is what I just said. There will be inherent insecurity in the personality via tendency to project the experience of security or happiness outside the self onto the family or significant others. So because the moon represents our security needs, our inner security life, and the mother, the relationship we have with the mother. The moon is, when it's square the nodes, it's highly activated, it's highly tuned in and plugged in. And, it gets, the nodes operate in a way where we get kind of thrown back and forth from the south node to the north node. So when we're on the south node, we're operating in a way that's fairly unconscious, but that's also very familiar to us. And because it's familiar, it's somewhat easier, as it were. The north node being the future direction, the path that we need to actualize and evolve through is the more difficult pathway to take, because it's not familiar, it's unknown territory, so it brings up a lot of anxieties. But the moon will get triggered, from the south node. It will find its way, the person will find their way, towards the north node, and then they might go back to the south node position again. And the moon is always connected to the past. Water is the past, and the moon is always the past. The moon square the nodes is a very highly activated, intuitive moon, and very important relationships with mother or women as well, I would say. So something very unresolved with the maternal, mothering, feminine principle within the individual that needs to be actualized and worked through this lifetime. Mercury has to do with unresolved issues regarding the mental life of the individual. Now, I would bring in siblings as well, because Mercury connects to siblings. So I can just go a bit further here. So it says here that the mental component that is suggesting that there's some unresolved mental components can connect to rigid thinking, for instance, or excessive restless curiosity, and can lack discrimination ability as well. This placement may represent an issue with internalized messages or introjects of a critical nature that undermine the strength of the personality. Such internalized guilt emphasized in the sixth house Virgo, because Virgo connects to Mercury as well, can become the basis for internal shame or a masochistic tendency. This placement may indicate a range of communication issues, for example, an issue with trusting the opinion of others. Lies or conflicting views as to the nature of the truth may have had profound consequences in prior lives. So something to do with the left brain mental faculty that really needs to be confronted and understood and worked with this lifetime. I wouldn't say that that's one of the more difficult ones, Mercury, but obviously any planet square the node needs attention. So the sibling component might be, a current sibling in this lifetime. The person has some very important connection with that sibling, perhaps some unresolved matters to do with a previous connection with their sibling in other lifetimes. Now, Venus connects to how we relate to ourselves and how we relate to others. It's a sharing principle, magnetic principle, relationships, love, sharing, values, all those sorts of things. There's something to do with how one relates with their own self internally, because Venus rules Taurus and Libra, and the Taurus component is our own internal value system, and the Libra component is how we relate to others. So you can see from that it is about how we relate to ourselves and how we relate to others. So something unresolved from the past relative to those aspects of life. And also it can be past life experiences where the person just overdid the Libran thing in the sense of, pleasing everybody, wanting to maintain, the harmony, the peace, difficult to kind of stand up for themselves and assert themselves, just people pleasing basically. So some unresolved issues and matters around relationships and just how one relates to relationships and how they relate to themselves within the context of relationships as well. Can also relate to extreme periods of isolation as well as excessive social activity. That could be either. This placement can indicate an issue with projected meaning or not seeing the true reality of others due to our transference onto them. We might transfer unresolved issues onto our partners and friends, co-opting them to play roles in our own inner drama. This placement can also refer to a life-threatening situation whereby the self has become highly anxious, causing great difficulty in relating to its own needs. It can indicate a situation whereby the person needs to learn to be alone, to love and accept themselves before being able to meet others on an equal footing. So very important, something really, really fundamental needs to be resolved this lifetime with regards to the world of relationships, and how one gives themselves and how one shares and how one receives, because Venus is about giving and receiving. And that's something that, you know, many people have struggles with, especially receiving, you know, and that can really connect to a number of different things, connecting to guilt, feeling not good enough, you know, all sorts of things. Something about Venus needs to be worked through. Mars can be a range of possibilities regarding unresolved anger. So something about Mars hasn't been resolved or worked through properly in a previous lifetime. Can be a lot of suppressed anger. Can also be sexual aggression, violence, things like that. Hidden anger. This placement can signify situations whereby the will has become co-opted in some fashion and the person is overly compliant or lost. We could also see a situation in which excessive dominance has distorted the soul's original intention. You know, Mars is the planet of dominance, to a lesser degree of Pluto, of course. This placement can indicate an unmet need for independence, which can then be a source of suppressed anger. But the unmet need can also express a source of paradox in relationship, whereby the freedom to grow with another is desired, but a subconscious fear of entrapment prevents this need being fulfilled meaningfully. So issues around anger, assertion, independence, the ability to express one's goals, be themselves, how to use that Mars in a functional, healthy way that's directed in a way that can enable the person to actualize their Mars energy, their power, their will in a very healthy way. Something in the past has gone wrong with that. So this lifetime, the call and the urge is to, and the desires is to get that right, to get that Mars acting in a very healthy way, consciously. Jupiter, unresolved material relates to the person's beliefs, the teachers or teachings that may have followed, from homespun philosophies to the great spiritual traditions and their relationship to faith. So something about the person's experience of faith, their belief systems, the philosophies and religions that they were involved in, something unresolved about the life in all of that in the previous life needs to be attended to this lifetime. So perhaps the person this lifetime, you know, is born into a particular religion that triggers off certain, you know, unconscious memories about past experiences that related to a life where the person was unable to explore their sense of faith in the way that they needed to or wanted to, or it's also naturally, if we're talking about philosophy and religion and belief systems, it's truth, isn't it? It's one's truth. It's the truth seeker. So just read what he says here. This issue can indicate an issue with honesty, either through a conflict of how the truth has been perceived or through an inner lie. The nature of the inner lie often stemming from integral exaggeration at the expense of the true picture of the nature of the self. Now, Jupiter has always got to do with exaggeration. Jupiter is the all-expansive energy. So, you know, Jupiter can over-exaggerate things because it's that all-expansive energy. It goes to, it seeks to expand everything that it touches. So Jupiter square the nodes, something needs to be addressed, explored, actualized, attended to, understood from the point of view of the person's sense of faith, what they what they hook their faith into this lifetime that will have, you know, unresolved residue from past lives, and there'll be links there with past life beliefs and current life beliefs. It's something they need to work through in this lifetime with the sense of faith they have in life in general, and the faith they have in themselves, and the faith they have in what they believe, essentially. Now, Saturn is a tough one. As I said at the beginning, I've got this. Saturn's always difficult, no matter no matter where it is. You know, in terms of where it is in your birth chart, what it's aspecting in your chart, etc. Saturn is a really difficult energy to deal with, period. We have to apply ourselves consciously. We have to work very hard with Saturn's energy. But the trick is with energy, and I've learned this in my own life, is to understand that Saturn can only take us in our development up to a certain point. That's why Saturn rules boundaries and limitations, because it can only take you to a certain point of actualization or development. It is the outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, that go beyond Saturn's boundaries and expand our field of consciousness and actualization and experience and individuation. Saturn can't do that. So if we get sucked into Saturn's world, we get sucked into the idea that we're limited, that there is only this physical experience, that we are, you know, limited by physical boundaries, that this is it, that the game of life is here, right now, what you see, and that's it. That's what Saturn that's the kind of belief or perception that Saturn can create, which is incredibly limiting. That's when Saturn's operating at that pure 3D dimension from a psychological fear-based level, because don't forget, Saturn connects to fear. Saturn ate his own children, the fear of his children overcoming him and overthrowing him in his throne rulership position. Unresolved Saturn relates to unresolved material conditioning that the individual has been exposed to either through family, society, religion, or by any broader historical societal theme. Such conditioning then becomes the basis for repression. So it's about learning how to mature. You know, when Saturn is square the nodes, we need to learn to take responsibility for our own life and really learn how to be mature and adult and emotionally mature and stable in our own life, because the tendency can be to try and seek that from other external sources, whether it's relationships, personal relationships, or family, or professional field, etc. Saturn forces us to take responsibility for ourselves. And the beauty of that in the end, which I can assure you is the case, is the discovery that your own sense of authority is the greatest space you can be in. And I think that's one of the main lessons for Saturn square the nodes. It's actualizing your own authority internally and understanding how to utilize that in this 3D dimension, so that you feel empowered in your own life and don't feel limited by Saturn's bounds and constrictions and limitations. Okay, Uranus. Now, Uranus is all about liberation, isn't it? So liberation, freedom, one's individuation, process and path. So something in the past hasn't been completed. You know, it hasn't been worked through, understood, developed. So this lifetime, the person is going to have an incredible urge to break through. You know, to have breakthroughs with the Uranian energy. Something very important about Uranus needing to be actualized this lifetime, because something in the past didn't reach its truest potential with the Uranian energy. So the person will feel inclined this lifetime to, I mean, you know, they can also be a person who's quite rebellious, who certainly doesn't fit into the status quo. They are, you know, liberation seekers. They seek to shake the system up, all that sort of stuff. Now, unresolved material indicates a need for liberation from conditioning and liberation from the past. So there's something about the person's past life that the conditions that were set in place, set in motion and encountered in a past life, the person this lifetime is seeking to break through all that, seeking liberation essentially, deconditioning, destructuring the Saturnian conditions. Can also symbolize a crisis in individuation. The person has started to detach themselves from prior conditioning, but they have either not been able to maintain this process, or they remain blind to a critical aspect of how the conditioning imprisons them, which then results in a block to true expression of their individuality. This placement can indicate a specific fear or post-traumatic stress that blocks access to the true self. It can also mark the need to reintegrate some former illumination that has been lost or resisted. There is a powerful requirement to embrace the transformational nature of the self. Regression work or depth therapy can aid in covering deeper unconscious material, both trauma and gifts. This placement emphasizes the importance of the Uranus opposition. So what he's talking about there is when if a person has Uranus square the nodes when they're 42 or thereabouts, and they have the Uranus opposite Uranus transiting in their birth chart, that can be a real powerful time to break through all this past conditioning. So very important placement there as well. Okay, Pluto. Well, we know Pluto represents the soul, it represents the will, the power, transformations that will go through the death and rebirth processes, deep painful experiences that will ultimately regenerate the individual. Got to do with compulsions, obsessions, you know, all those sorts of things. So it says here that the unresolved material relates to the deepest unconscious self, because the Pluto represents the deepest unconscious part of ourself. Its motivations, compulsions, resistances, and urge for transformation. In some way, this is the ultimate skip step. Skip step just simply means squaring the node, when a planet is squaring the node. Pluto square the nodal axis can be linked to a fork in the road, a battle between the adaptive self and the higher self, between ego and the soul. And that's a really powerful statement, actually, because the way I see that is that most human beings seem to be in some kind of battle with the ego and the soul. And the key, and I always say this, the key is to align the soul's intention, the soul's evolutionary path with the ego function. When we can start to do that, and that usually happens in, you know, midlife for people. That's when people really start to grasp that and get a sense of it, and really get into that space and begin that journey at a much deeper level, because they're ready to, they're able to. You know, life up until 40 is very ego dominated. If you take a look around, you'll see that yourself. This placement represents a fundamental encounter with deeper unconscious forces, either to evoke radical transformation, to become trapped in psychological attachments and compulsions, or some combination of both. A critical divide in the deeper self needs exploration and resolution, yet this placement indicates the potential for tremendous resistance to the evolutionary goal. That's the ego resisting. That's, I mean, the soul is the driver regardless, but the ego is always going to kick up its little resistances and its fears and insecurities and so forth. Can also represent a struggle between power and powerlessness. So some issue pertaining to the past where the individual overpowered certain situations or people, or was overpowered and experienced a sense of feeling powerlessness. The contrast of both, experiencing power and experiencing powerlessness. Something about that needs to be further developed this lifetime is going to show up in the person's life when Pluto square the nodes. And I think because the nodes also represent, because they represent the past and future, they also represent drawing in people into our life from the past and making new important connections in the current life, North Node. So Pluto square the nodes, the person is likely to encounter some very powerful connections with people this lifetime, which will teach them very much about the experience of power and powerlessness. It's a very, very important placement, Pluto square the nodes. It's a very powerful signature and theme in the person's life that I could do a reading just on that if the person had Pluto square the nodes, and you can very easily get a very big story of the person's life just with that one thing, because it's such a powerful pattern, theme, story, signature, whatever you want to call it. Okay, I'll move on to Neptune because I really need to finish this video. Okay, now Neptune's got to do with the ultimate sense of meaning, the ultimate truth that we sense, experience, or are looking for. It's got to do with our dreams and ideals. Now, this is a tricky one, as as we would expect it to be. Neptune is all elusive, very difficult to actualize in the material. We have to go into another dimension to really activate the Neptunian energy, which exists within us. Quite an unconscious energy. It's not a materialized energy, so it's something that needs to be activated in very subtle sort of vibrations, subtle dimensions. Now, when Neptune is square the nodes, there's something about the past that relates to the person not having been able to actualize some kind of dream, some kind of ideal that was super important to the person. They really struggled to actualize that dream. So this lifetime, there's something very important in the person's life pertaining to, you know, a dream that they have. It might be very unconscious, so it's about activating this energy. Some dream that they need to really work on this lifetime. So when I say dream, I'm talking about, you know, somebody might have a dream to be a healer, a doctor, an actor, a vet, whatever. It doesn't matter. It's not defined by anything other than what the person feels is a dream for them, and they wish to actualize that dream, whatever it is. So some very important dream or ideal was left behind, and this lifetime the person needs to really actualize that dream and that ideal. It's really important that they do it this lifetime. So it can be tricky because it can remain in the person's unconscious, and it can just be can remain as a fantasy, you know, and the person needs to get very real this lifetime with their dream. Otherwise, it just, you know, remains in their imagination, and they feel it's impossible to reach that dream, you know, but it's not, and they need to get there. That's why they have Neptune square the nodes. Neptune square the nodes is telling them this is connecting to the South Node past what you haven't been able to achieve for whatever reason that is. And when I say whatever reason, what I mean is that if I was reading Neptune square the nodes for you, I would be looking at the houses that are involved, which would give me the context, okay, of perhaps what happened in the past and what needs to shape and take form this lifetime, which will have to do with the houses involved. So these people need to have strong discrimination this lifetime as well, because, you know, there's a tendency to just get really lost in fantasy land and not being able to discriminate between what's real and what's fantasy. That's another theme that can come up very strongly. Can also be spiritual crisis. So having experienced spiritual crisis in a previous life, and this lifetime seeking to work through that, to heal that, but ultimately they can experience a great sense of transformation through a spiritual crisis that they may have again this lifetime, because this lifetime the Neptune being square the nodes means that they will have to work through it. We have to work through any planetary energy that's square the nodes. Now, do we all do it? Not necessarily. It depends on you know, on the individual. But is the calling there for it? Is the message there for it? Yes, indeed it is. Now, whether we achieve it or not is a different story, but the message is there for us to pay attention to. Can also point to a person who's been very lost in their spiritual path. So even this lifetime, they can feel very sort of lost and confused and swayed and uncertain and unclear and difficult to find direction in their spiritual path. So that's a big part of their life calling this lifetime, you know, working through that and becoming clear about that and having a stronger sense of what that means for them and actualizing it in their life, in their daily life, in their life journey throughout their life. Something that will, you know, it will always pop up somehow. Yeah, so that's all the planets apart from Chiron. Chiron's not mentioned in this book. But I suspect Chiron, you know, will have themes, very strong themes around the issue of experience relating to rejection and deep wounds. Rejection is a key word for Chiron. So is wound or wounds or wounding, but so is rejection. So if Chiron is squaring the nodes, there's been some experience of some deep rejection or wounding that has taken place that this lifetime is being called to be healed, essentially, to put it very briefly. And naturally, the houses and, of course, the signs that the nodes are in, and Chiron, etc., all these details are going to flesh in, you know, the context of the story for any given individual. Okay, I'll leave it there, guys. I hope this video was useful for you. If you haven't considered these sorts of considerations before, have a think about them. Have a look at your own chart, friends' charts, family charts, you know, whoever it is you're looking at or exploring at this point in your life. Now, this clearly was an introduction. There would be much more to understand and unpack, but the points that I've made about every single planet squaring the nodes, they are really key points, very central themes and key points. And you can very easily expand on that yourself just by looking at your own chart. So give it a go. And please feel free to ask any questions or make any comments below this video. I'm happy to respond and to receive your questions and comments. In fact, I appreciate them very much. Thanks again for watching, and thank you to my new subscribers. Really appreciate all of you, and I'll see you guys soon with another video. Thank you. Bye.